So good morning or good afternoon, everybody. You're very welcome to the fourth and final webinar on the Breaking Boundaries series, looking at the experience of postgraduate disabled students. And this series of webinars was arranged by the Forum of Disabled Staff and Postgraduate Researchers. Jared Gallagher is my name. I'm the head of Student Disability Supports, and I have come in to assist the forum in some of their activities. In this forum, we're delighted that the webinars have been recorded and they're available on the Ability Co-op website. So if you pop into the Ability Co-op, if you haven't gotten to our previous webinars, you can pop along and listen back to some of those webinars. They're well worth listening to if you're looking for something to do while you're making a cup of tea some morning. So delighted today to be joined. We have two speakers, and the first is Daniel Twomey, who's a third-year PhD student in the School of Education. He's looking at the experience of disability, positive mental health, looking at fitness and well-being, and he's also a member of staff in Trinity Sport. So we're delighted to hear about Daniel's experience. I'm also told importantly he's from Cork, so no doubt he'll give a bit of a Cork experience also. So Daniel, without any further ado, I'll hand over to you to share your experience.
Well, thank you very much, Jared, and thanks so much again for the invitation to be here today. So my experience so far with my PhD, I don't think it's conventional, but I don't think anybody's is from experience. So my background is physical education, so a graduate of the University of Limerick. Went teaching in Cork for 6 years post graduation from undergrad, and ended up falling into the PhD. I was, after 6 years of teaching, took a career break with the intention of going traveling. I went to Mozambique for the summer, and the plan was then to go to the Middle East to go teaching, but decided against it at the last moment and stayed in Cork because all my contemporaries and peers would tell me there's no place better, so I leave. But I hung around and found myself teaching in UCC on their physical education and sports studies program. And I really enjoyed it. And I found whatever was missing from my professional life as a secondary school teacher after 6 years, I found it in the kind of academic third level sphere. I really enjoyed the lecturing. So I said, you know what, I'll pursue this. A PhD in well-being, so physical activity and positive mental health, came up in UCC while I was teaching there. And it was advertised within my team of colleagues, and a colleague of mine had given me the heads up that it was coming up and told me after a conversation that I initiated, saying that I would like to do one. He said, this is coming up and you might be interested. So applied in UCC for the PhD, went through the rounds of interviews, and I didn't get it. There was a better applicant for that particular PhD program. And I was disappointed, but at that stage I decided that this is what I wanted to do. So I sent my research proposal to Trinity College, and it ended up in front of Professor Conor McGuckin, and he took me on. And that's how it came about. It wasn't a big career plan for me. I would never have anticipated it. I do come from a family of teachers. I always knew I'd be within education in some degree, but the third level stuff came as a surprise to everybody. But I love it. And in my third year now, I'm working with Conor since around 2017. I had an initial year of a kind of a research fellow. And I think Conor called me at that point, where I was doing work with Conor, working in Trinity Sport, but not on books with my PhD. Took a little bit of a break to go to Australia, which turned out to be a longer break, there for a year. And then when I came back from Australia, I came on books. And as I registered for my PhD, I think 6 months later, the COVID-19 pandemic struck. So that's kind of brought me to this point. I was living on campus in Trinity since day one of my official PhD. I've just moved to Trinity Halls for the summer months. I'll be here. I arrived yesterday, and I'll be here until August at least. And then hopefully be able to enter my final year of PhD next year. The PhD is very much focused on physical activity and positive mental health. That was the real general area. Whereas now it has kind of evolved into more of a nudge theory study, and we're trying to influence through choice architecture students and their to maybe initiate more of a healthy lifestyle amongst cohort students in Trinity. And between Trinity Sports and Student Counselling Services, I've been facilitated in running this project starting in September. And it's all quite exciting, and I do love it. So I'm very fortunate to be reading and writing about stuff that I'm very, very interested in. The interest and the passion comes from my own experience as an undergraduate student. So when I was in the University of Limerick, studying to be a teacher of physical education and geography, I had a really bad episode with my own mental health, and was hospitalized in St. Patrick's Hospital here in Dublin twice for depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. Had to take a year out of university and take a step back and focusing on looking after myself. But it was a real crisis point I found myself in 2008. But with the support of people around me, my family and my teachers and university professionals at the time in UL, looking after me between student counselling services there and the academic staff, I was looked after. Since then, I've just been focusing on developing my own, lifestyle and looking after myself through self-care and through it started off as really informal research as to how a human being could look after himself or herself. And now that's after evolving into a proper research study that I hope to share and to maybe help people that might be in a similar position that I found myself in 2008. So the project I'll be working with, I'll be working directly with undergraduate students, and my plan for post-PhD would be really try to make a difference for young people with their mental health and physical health, just well-being and how we can look after ourselves. So that would be the plan kind of post-PhD. But the study that I'm doing is really focusing on the core four of self-care and lifestyle health. So it's focusing on adequate sleep, adequate hydration, adequate physical activity, and then adequate nutrition for looking after oneself. And the learnings that I'm taking from the research, I'm sharing on social media through my startup. I set up a business week one of PhD. It's called DTW. It stands for Depression to Wellbeing, which is almost an autobiographical title, but it is DTW and DT Wellbeing. And I am DT, but yeah. So that is the startup. And at the moment, what we do is it's personal training for mind and body. So I'm qualified in personal training and fitness instruction, but also mindfulness-based stress reduction. So they're the kind of vocational skills I use in DTW for one-to-one coaching. I also do group coaching and online coaching and public speaking in this area. And up until recently, I was just self-employed doing those things. But through working very closely with the Trinity Entrepreneurial Society, and I've been with them from the start in the last 2 years at a committee level position, I'm growing my business. And now I have 3 other students working with me. And the plan is to evolve it from individual coaching to maybe setting up an academy someday, coaching people how to coach in the manner in which I have been since 2017. But it was always the idea to use social media to share my research. When I met Connor back in 2017 in Starbucks in IFSC, and he heard my story and we chatted and we talked about our goals and our aspirations, he said, you know what, you're a little bit different and it would be useful to use your social media presence to share the research and the knowledge that you will be gaining invariably through the PhD. So we've been doing that and steadily building our social media platform and numbers, and that way we can influence in maybe a an unusual manner perhaps, or a non-conventional way to share the research. But things have been going well, not always. An example is that I wasn't successful in my confirmation interview, round 1. So we'll be doing confirmation interview round 2 shortly. More confident now, and in hindsight, I had no complaints at the time. I wasn't ready, and it wasn't ready, and the actual pragmatic or the practical elements of the studies, it wasn't as in place as perhaps it should have been, whereas it is now. So we'll give that another go. PhD journey in and of itself, I've loved the study, I've loved the research, I've loved the privilege of living in Trinity College Dublin during the pandemic. I was living on campus with a couple of security guards and a fox. That's all I saw, at least. And all of those things have been lovely. But the most significant, or the most, important thing for me is how I have grown. And the PhD was what brought me here and what has kept me here. But me as a person, I've had to, through resilience and developing grit and stick-with-itness, I have developed, a lot of resilience through the process of doing a PhD and surviving in Dublin, paying Dublin rents. As Patricia and Jared alluded to, I'm not from Dublin, believe it or not. So, but I will, no matter what, if I was to walk away today without the PhD, I'm still in a much better position than when I came to Dublin in 2017. It has changed my world, and I'll be forever grateful for that. But yeah, that's my story, and it's just the journey. I've really enjoyed it, and I walked into campus as a resident for the last time 2 nights ago, and I had been in Nice for the weekend. My partner is French; she's in France. I was in Nice for the weekend, and I came in, and I was close to 1 a.m. And I must have shed a tear, I think, when the security guard opened the door. It's like, "God, Daniel, in you've come, and the welcoming arms of Trinity College." And I'll always remember that. And that's my PhD story. So
I think that's it's a really interesting story to tell, and really interesting to just hear your experience, Daniel, and how sometimes maybe things don't quite go according to plan, but it's that resilience that you've kind of kept going, and you've got, as you say, confirmation part 2 coming up in the next little while. Sorry, some of you that are watching me on the screen can see the dog in the background. My office is a kitchen, so there's people wondering if the room is free for lunch. So if you hear a bark in the background, that's what that will be. Really interesting though, Daniel, talking or hearing you talk about that sense of belonging as well, coming back to Trinity over the weekend, and how you're feeling at home. So I think without further ado, we might hand over at this point to Sara Kift. And Sara is a PhD candidate in the School of Medicine in Trinity College Dublin in the discipline of occupational therapy. She's a specialism in the field of neuro-occupational therapy, and previously Sara obtained a doctorate in science in clinical occupational therapy from Baylor College, and a Master of Science in Occupational Therapy from King University. Interestingly, Sara spent 5 years in the US Army before medically retiring, and she has several disabilities that have led her to take an active role in the disability community here in Trinity College Dublin. She's a member, she's the first disability officer for the Graduate Students' Union, and she holds board seats on the Forum for Disabled Staff and the postgraduates in Trinity, and is also an active participant in the Disabled Research Network. So without any further ado, Sara, I'll hand her over to you, and I'll go on mute. Thanks a lot.
Perfect. Thank you for the introduction. I really appreciate it. So just a little bit of background on me, or a little more background. I'm a disabled adult, but I didn't always identify as disabled. That's something that I've come to through quite a process. I was always a bendy kid. So I was the kid who could drop down and do a split. I danced for many, many years. I was always very flexible, and could do yoga without stretching or warming up. But that was just sort of a quirk. And then, of course, I started getting weird kind of injuries and illnesses that nobody really had a great explanation for. And it actually wasn't until I was a full-grown adult, had my son, that I was diagnosed with a connective tissue disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So tissue disorder, connective tissue makes up all of the tissue in your body, or much of all the tissue in your body is made up of connective tissue. And mine is not functioning the way that it should. My most severely impacted system is actually my gastrointestinal system, which led me to multiple surgeries at this point. And I'm actually in chronic GI failure, so intestinal failure. I also have an autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic system regulates your heartbeat and your temperature and your blood pressure. And mine likes to go, I describe it as a little bit pesky. It doesn't necessarily work the way it should. So sometimes things are too high or too low. So all of these things have left me as an adult with, I don't like to call it a hidden disability because sometimes it's quite visible, but it's a fluctuating disability. And in many ways, this is difficult to deal with because sometimes people see me and I look like a healthy adult, and sometimes they see me and I use a motorized scooter or walking aids, or I need to sit down and rest, or my blood sugar's gone crazy and I'm laying on the floor because I need some glucose. And it's hard to reconcile those two images for many people. So this has led me to be very interested in being an active member of the disability community, both at Trinity and on a wider scale. But it's also had a huge impact on my academic history. So, as was mentioned a little bit in the introduction, this is actually my second graduate degree. So my first one I did in the United States. So all my degrees have been in occupational therapy. I'm very consistent with that. Though my first one was while I was in the Army and I was working, I studied adults with upper extremity amputations and their return to duty rates. So whether they stayed on active duty in the US military after an upper extremity amputation. So very different than what I'm doing now. Part of what happened during the course of that degree was I was not diagnosed with my current diagnoses at that point in time. So it was almost even more of trying to navigate what was going wrong with me on a given day. So some days I was very highly functional and things worked well. And then I was not so much. And I had my first temporary handicapped parking badge because my iron had dropped and I was unable to walk across a parking lot without getting breathless. The benefit in the higher education system in the US was my supervisors there were able to put me in for disability accommodations. And because I work in the field of occupational therapy, they were in many ways very well prepared to deal with my level of disability. So they were able to put in place accommodations for handicap parking that got me closer to my classes. I was able to do my field works with reasonable success and not a lot of accommodations at that point in time. But they were in place should I need them. I didn't miss a large amount of school, though I was able to miss some additional time when I needed for various illnesses and injuries. So I was able to graduate that program and went on and worked as a neonatal occupational therapist for several years. And then I was presented with the opportunity to move with my family, my husband and 2 children, here to Ireland to pursue a PhD in neonatal occupational therapy at Trinity. So neonatal OT is work with little tiny babies in the neo unit, so premature or with other significant conditions that lead them to be hospitalized for a period of time. I'm one of very few occupational therapists in Ireland who work in this area. So I'm actually getting to start a pilot program in this area, which is very exciting, in a maternity hospital. So my experience was I moved here, and Daniel before, I started my PhD right before COVID. And I actually didn't get hooked in with disability services at Trinity right away. I was sort of unaware of how that process would work here. And also, as Daniel spoke to, the process of a PhD is very individual, and I wasn't sure exactly what accommodations might be needed. Well, thanks to Vivian and Patricia, the Forum for Disabled Staff and Postgraduates took off right basically at the same time. So I think I was in from the initial meeting or two, and instantly was able to get so much information from the forum about how accommodations might work for a postgraduate student, what the process was, what I needed to do. They were very quick to advocate that I needed to tie in with disability services and essentially see what they could offer, and how we could preemptively see what accommodations might be needed. So I registered with Trinity Disability Services, met with my occupational therapist through them, and we were able to discuss how this process might work for me at the PhD level. PhDs have the benefit of, in some ways, making, well, PhDs by research. I can't speak to many of the other programs, but I have the benefit of very much driving my own ship, to mix metaphors on that. So I can do as many hours or be as active in different areas as I need to be, or modify it to be working more from home as I need as well. Disability services really helped me address different accommodations that I would potentially need. So we needed to do some adaptive setups with my working from home. I needed some adaptive, I had some visual tracking issues, so setting up some adaptive equipment with that. And disability services was on board throughout the entire time. The other thing that we set up from the beginning, my health was in less good shape than it was for my previous degree, and we knew that I would potentially need some time off books. So when we wrote up my accommodations, we did write that this was potentially something that would need to be factored in, that we might need to adjust the length and scale of the PhD depending on my physical ability to complete various aspects of it. And I'm very grateful that we put that in from the beginning, because that has turned out to be the case. Now, once again, I'm in the field of occupational therapy, and I would not have nearly the same success, I don't think, with accomplishing my degree if my supervisors were not as accommodating and understanding of my needs as they are. So every time I've come up against a obstacle, we've been able to brainstorm different ways that we can work around it and sort out how to continue to have me work towards achieving this PhD. One of the biggest challenges that I've come up against with the current PhD is my physical abilities and my need to conduct a study that involves an active placement. So I'm out at a maternity hospital doing my research at the moment. And one of the challenges that many disabled people come up against is the need to continually justify what I can do. So I had to go through the occupational health assessment that all staff have to go through when working in healthcare or at this particular hospital, and to justify how I was physically able to be on the unit and to do what I need to do on a day-to-day basis. This was really interesting, but also challenging, because on the one hand, when you look at me on paper, I look like I have significant issues that would prevent me from being able to accomplish my job. But on the other hand, I know what I can do, and I do my best, which is pretty much all any of us can do. So I was able to talk with occupational health and convince them that I was able to be on the unit and to accomplish this PhD. Now I do it with modification. I can't stand for hours at a time. I can stand for brief periods, but thankfully the maternity hospital has many stools and different places that I can sit in. I wear some accommodations, so I'm the person in compression stocks all the time, and do various other accommodations to make sure that my blood pressure doesn't drop. And I take breaks when I need to, which is the other benefit of making my own schedule. I also work with tiny, tiny babies, because physically, well, when I was a younger and more able-bodied OT, I could move a large adult without help. I'm not at that place anymore. So working with small infants is much easier for me to handle physically as well. So I've chosen a specific area of occupational therapy that works with my physical limitations. One of my other things that I want to address is I would not have been as active in this role with Trinity Disability if it wasn't for Vivian and Patricia and the Forum for Staff and Disabled Students. This has created this community that allows us to have a place where we can discuss various accommodations that may be needed, but in a really wonderful social manner. And it led me to seek out the GSU, the Graduate Student Union Disability position. I would not have sought that before, but being able to raise more awareness that there are disabled students who are in postgraduate education was very important to me. We still aren't necessarily a very visible section of the population, and not that we have to be visible, as there's many hidden disabilities, but knowing that there are other postgraduates who have gone through this process was really what we were looking to accomplish with this series at Trinity, this series of lectures. So even though I'm going through the PhD process myself, and I've already gotten a previous doctorate, I found it incredibly motivating and beneficial to hear from other speakers who had gone through this with various disabilities as well. So I want to make sure I leave plenty of time for questions, as I know we potentially have some other disabled staff or students who might want to ask some questions about how this process has been for me. But yeah, that is my story of disabled education at this point, my experiences of higher education and disability.
Patricia, will I hand over to you?
Yeah, that's fine. Sorry, I was afraid to come blurting in case you were ready to take over.
No.
Thank you to both Daniel and to Sarah for sharing their stories to date. And as you will know, their stories are not late, and hopefully we will get the opportunity to bring them back at some point in the future to update us on their stories. Don't see any questions in the chat box yet, but I will give people an opportunity now to pop them in the chat if they so wish. The reason we do this is that it actually makes it easier for the ISL interpreter if we're, just rather than it just coming out from different people. So if anyone has a question, please feel free to put it in the chat box and we will keep checking it there. Is someone trying to say
Patricia,
something?
it's me here, Vivian. Just whilst we're waiting for some questions, I was just reflecting on the fact that we've had a whole series now of 4 seminars over the last couple of months, and they've been really successful. And I think, the attendance over the last couple of weeks, which have been pretty high, in my opinion, says something really, and I feel it says that there is a need to talk about this more, to discuss the experiences of disabled researchers, disabled people undertaking postgraduate study. I'm just wondering, what was your main takeaway from the 4 seminars or 4 lectures?
You're directing that question at me, is it?
Yeah. I mean, if you're happy to answer that, Patricia.
Absolutely. I was just making sure. I suppose a couple of things. The diversity of experience has been really interesting to hear and listen to. And I suppose how people have navigated their PhD journey. And it really demonstrated the importance, I suppose, of knowing that they could avail of support from the disability service is one thing. Also, and we would have spoken about this, or the forum has spoken about this before, the important role that supervisors play in this journey, and whether they have, how they provide supports. And sometimes, it's a smoother path than others, and a lot of that is down to awareness around disability and disability issues. I suppose that's one of the things. And I suppose for me, these 4 seminars really illustrated what myself and Vivian and many others have spoken about for a number of years now, is around the importance of giving disabled people the platform to have their voice heard. And I think really that is something that has become very apparent over the 4 sessions for different months. We've run it approximately once a month or every 3 weeks. And just to say again that these recordings, including today's one, will be up in the next couple of days, I'm sure. They are available on the TCD Co-op website currently. And I would definitely encourage anyone who hasn't been able to take advantage of attending the previous sessions to go there and have a listen. And, you know, for those that are listening in that may identify as disabled and within Trinity, and what, or even not within Trinity, that want to join the forum for staff and PhD researchers, please reach out to either myself or Vivian, and we'll be more than happy to add you to the mailing list. Now, I do see a question in here from Maura, I think, and I'm going to ask it of either speaker, or both speakers can speak to this. What has been the most challenging obstacle you have had to overcome? So would
I can take that first.
Yeah.
So for me, like on a macro level, I was riddled with a lot of insecurities, and I was just an unhappy teenager and very unhappy in my 20s. And I think I put that down to a lot of, like, I really wanted external validation all the time. And it was ego for, like, you know, that's how it manifested. It was all insecurities. And I really had to learn how to love myself and to take care of myself. And I think that was, like, over the course of my life, that was the biggest challenge, to not pay so much attention to other people's opinions of Daniel, and to start kind of working internally. And that's what I think has been the difference in my 30s that I didn't have in my 20s or teens. And on a kind of a more micro level, like within starting my PhD, for mine, it was very much the practical nature of being a non-funded PhD researcher and being able to pay my way and survive, and financial management and all this sort of things that come with returning to third level education. I found I love doing the research. I love when I get to do my full-time job as a researcher. It's the other stuff I found more challenging, but you know, that's part of the whole package. But those are the things that I found difficult since coming to Dublin, just financing the postgraduate studies.
Thanks, Daniel. Sarah?
I'm going to take a little bit of a cheeky answer to this one, and I'm just going to say ethics. This was my bugbear that took me a really long time as part of my PhD to get through. Just the process of it was a very difficult thing for any number of reasons. On a more macro level, it really is having people understand, for me personally, just the fluctuating nature of disability. The fact that I don't present with exactly the same problems at a given time. So it can be very hard when people make assumptions. Well, you could do that one day. Why can't you do that today? And on a very real level, that's been a personal challenge for me. You sort of come up against imposter syndrome, where you almost feel for yourself, well, I was able to do that. Why can't I do that now? And that has certainly been a challenge that I've confronted quite a bit with my PhD, and has really brought me more self-awareness and more awareness of my own disabilities and how I function with them as a human being.
Thanks, Sarah. I just want to acknowledge Mark, who also put in the chat box that he wanted to thank Daniel for sharing his story, and he found it very interesting and inspiring. Now, this question is for Sara. In the health care profession, how do you challenge assumptions colleagues may make around disability?
So that's a great question. In many ways, healthcare workers are both the best and the worst for this with me. They're the best because when you actually see me in, and working and functioning in my healthcare setting, they tend to be very supportive and understand kind of what I've overcome to be there. But in many ways, they're the worst because, as I sort of mentioned, if you look at me on paper, it's a mess. Like you wouldn't really expect that I would be as functional as I am. And often I've found, specifically when healthcare workers see that, they can make very distinct judgments about what my abilities are. So for example, I have a central line. I have an IV catheter that goes straight to my heart. And this is how I get nutrition and hydration. Most of the time, these lines are used for people who are undergoing cancer treatment or people like myself who are in intestinal failure. They have a very high rate of complications and infections. So people assume that I have this and therefore am completely unable to work or to be present in a high acuity neonatal unit or high acuity hospital setting. And the answer is, for me personally, I can function in that setting most of the time. As I previously mentioned, I do it with modifications. I can't stand for 2 hours while doctors go on rounds. I need to sit down in a stool for some pieces of that. And I need to make sure that I'm taking care of my body. So I need to make sure that I'm running my hydration fluids overnight and modifying it so that it works with my work schedule. But I'm able to do those things. So healthcare workers, and I'm also partially able to do those things because I am a healthcare worker. These aren't necessarily things that if I didn't work in this setting, I would understand how to manage on my own. And I would potentially need to spend more time in a healthcare setting as a patient because I wouldn't be able to handle this on my own. So I do find it interesting to challenge healthcare providers' assumptions about what I can and can't do. My other kind of personal favorite thing to do with this is I have an ostomy, so I have no large intestine. And often this is viewed as something that only old people have, or you have a bag and you smell. I like to challenge those assumptions because I'm pretty functional for somebody with an ostomy. And especially in a neonatal unit, we often have babies with ostomies. And parents often wonder if their child will lead a normal life or be able to go to school or be able to have a job. And being there as the person who has this medical device and is able to do all of those things, including having 2 healthy children and maintain a relationship and all of those things, I think that that really helps them see outside of the little box of disability that we can sometimes place people in, whatever their disability is. So I hope that being able to be in public and being out and about my disabilities really does help people in general challenge those assumptions, but especially medical providers.
That's a wonderful answer, Sara, and thank you for being so open and honest about, that are often hidden and not spoken about. And I suppose that's the important thing here. And Mark also really enjoyed your chat, Sara, and found it very interesting as well. Does anyone else have a question that they would like to ask, or even any comment that they would like to pop in the chat box? While people are doing that, again, I suppose we are coming close to the end of this seminar, and because we do we work to keep within the hour because we're aware that people are often on lunch break and things like that, and by doing it this way, people can actually come along and do it. I would like to take the opportunity, I suppose, to thank all that have facilitated us throughout the, oh, I think we have another question. Thank you so much to, I'm just reading it out now, to the incredible speakers for sharing so many insights on their PhD journeys, and that comes from Siobhan O'Brien. Thank you very much, Siobhan.
Patricia.
Yes, babe.
Just I when I have the opportunity now, I would like to firstly say well done to Sarah. There was absolutely fantastic, Sarah. Your honesty and openness is just really. It certainly makes me think and reflect on what can be done and how you know, in some cases a person who like yourself who's breaking those barriers down, who's a first mover. And sometimes they often talk about first mover advantage, but really, you know, is there really an advantage for a disabled person who's trying to get through those barriers? Do you think that it's more difficult? And what could be done, Sarah, to support disabled students who are breaking down those barriers?
Thanks, Viv. Great question again. I personally would not say that it's necessarily an advantage, or I personally have not experienced it as an advantage. I've in many cases just found it more challenging because I feel like you're just coming up against everybody's assumptions about who you are and what you can do, both from a positive and a negative standpoint. And I definitely feel like that is a challenge that I haven't personally experienced that as much of an advantage. What can be done about it? Now, that's where I think the forum has made a huge impact on this, because I think giving disabled people a platform to speak about these things and to put this out in a public conversation is kind of the only way that we can, as a group, break down some of these societal barriers and assumptions to what disabled people can and can't accomplish in both an academic and a workplace setting. So having a forum or a group where we can discuss, okay, we're disabled adults and this is how we function in higher academics or in a whole series. That's from the series, we've had people across the scope of careers and jobs and different, we're all connected to higher academics, but we work in a whole variety of different settings within that. I think it's wonderful because I think hopefully the broader community pays attention and says, okay, so it may be more apparent if somebody's working in deaf studies that maybe they're linked to, they have a connection to the deaf community, but you also might not know that somebody who you're working with has a hidden disability that may be less visually obvious, but I'm sure that everybody out there works with people with disabilities. So I think giving a platform where we can make these things a little bit more apparent maybe speaks that little tiny bit about how we make things more universally accessible. So that idea of universal design, or just making things across the board more accessible for everyone, which in turn will make things more accessible for those of us with disabilities as well. And maybe it will come to a point where we don't need to call particular attention to these things because the world is more accessible to the rest of us.
And I think that's a really important point that you've made there, Sarah, about that universal design. And it's something that has come up throughout the seminar series. I see we have our equality officer here, and the equality officer, Siobhan O'Brien Green, has been a great support to us in the forum whilst we were putting on many different events over the last couple of years. Siobhan, just as I said, we've had 4 lectures over the last 4 months, and we've had great interest in it. Across the university, what steps are being taken to ensure that disabled students are fully included within the campus, and what are your thoughts specifically around the postgraduate journey? I'm catching you on the spot, Sean, so I know, but I know you've been heavily involved. So.
Well, thanks so much for all the amazing speakers today. I've just come off the Equality Committee meeting, so I'm kind of running in from one meeting to another. So I don't feel as I'm prepared, but I'm always delighted to take part in any of the events that I know you and Patricia are co-chairing, working so hard on. And Sarah and Daniel, thank you so much for sharing your journey as well too. I mean, having come through the PhD process as well too, I can certainly identify with some of the challenges, but I suppose one of the focuses I've been really concentrating on, I have to say, in the last month, because we have a statutory duty to report our number of staff with disabilities under the Disability Act, and that statutory figure is changing and increasing at the moment. I'm really interested in transitions into workplace as well too, and transitions from our postgraduate and researcher community into employment too. And I know that was a big piece in our ableism and academia report that the forum led out on, and we were able to support in going live with towards the end of the year. So I think that's one thing that's been really, I suppose, focused on my mind, and engaging with the Department of Further Higher Education. I think it's Research and Science, and the submission that I put in last week, and I made specific reference to the forum in our submission from Trinity as well, and all the great work that's happening through events such as these networks, but also the gaps, I think, as well too, and how we want to engage more with that particular department, and indeed with the higher education authority too, in terms of supports for students, but also the transition into employment from postgraduate studies as well. So I suppose those are the things that are just center stage for me literally in the last couple of weeks. But also I was delighted to send in the Ableism and Academia report into the department as well, and highlight a good practice example of initiatives that are happening in Trinity. So that transition point, I suppose, is something I'm very conscious, but also our overall EDI strategy, which is in a slightly delayed production and rollout, because we've taken it upon ourselves to do more consultation and to seek some other external advice too about how we can best develop strong governance and strong structures for it. So I think it'll pay off in the end, but it's taking us a little bit longer. But I suppose watch this space would be my advice there too. So hopefully that'll respond a little bit to your query there.
Thank you, Siobhan. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Siobhan. And considering you were put on the spot, you did amazingly well. I just want to acknowledge as well, Keelan, that they've really enjoyed today's session, and that they found the whole seminar series of great benefit to them. So that's wonderful to hear. We're going to close now. I would like to take the opportunity to thank everyone who supported this seminar series, which was initiated by the Forum for Disabled Staff and PhD Students or PhD researchers, and to thank everyone, as I said, who has inputted to the series. We've covered a wide range of topics, from mental health and well-being through the experience of a deaf PhD student to invisible disabilities. And it really has been a wonderful opportunity to get a range of voices out into the public domain, where it often disabled people are often excluded or not heard to the level to which they should be. So I'm not going to say any more for today. I hope that maybe in the future we might be able to organize some more interesting seminars, but today is the last in this series. So thank you all very much, and I hope you have a good summer. Thank you.